Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here. No Gavin for this episode, but I'm joined by a fantastic guest. I have Lauren Gunn of the Gunshot Podcast, also one of the best voices on Mavs Twitter, because you guessed it, we got to talk about Jalen Brunson, the contract, the details, his game, how he's going to fit with the Knicks, how the Mavs are ever going to recover from losing him. So we got lots to talk about next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or have made the leap to YouTube where you can see us on camera every day, hopefully looking our best. But I am joined, as I said, by Lauren Gunn of the Gunshot Podcast and one of the best follows on Mavs Twitter at the Lauren Gunn. And I'm, of course, Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And I won't hold this up any further. I will just give one small disclaimer. We did record this episode before the news dropped that the Knicks are including Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel in the previously announced Kemba Walker deal to help clear up more space for Brunson. So there is a section in here where we do talk about sign and trades to the Mavs. I still don't necessarily know if that whole thing is dead yet, because the Mavs might offer up to be like, well, we want some of that action and need some replacements for Brunson. So let's make this into a multi-team sign and trade type deal. But Burks' name does come up. Noel's name does come up. Maybe it's still not out of the realm of possibility yet, but on the off chance that it is, just listen to that as a hypothetical, I guess. At any rate, I won't hold this up any further. Let's get into it with Lauren Gunn of the Gunshot Podcast. All right, as promised, I am joined by Lauren Gunn. She's the co-host of the Gunshot Podcast, aptly named, and one of my favorite voices and many people's favorite voices in the Mavs community on Twitter and elsewhere. Lauren, how you doing? You know what we're here to talk about. And you know the news that just broke, like, from a million different reporters like 10 minutes ago. How are you feeling right now, a couple days before free agency officially starts, but it almost feels like today it already did start because the floodgates are sort of opened on the Jalen Brunson front.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it definitely is not rainbows and butterflies over here in Mavs Twitter land. It's frustrating because, obviously Dallas had the opportunity to extend Jalen Brunson multiple times and they didn't. And I know a lot of Mavs fans are expressing frustration with that right now. And there are reasons why they didn't do that, but I don't know. It's a very complicated situation, and ultimately it is a mishandled situation by the Mavericks, and it looks like they're about to pay for that.
Yeah, so as you know, we're alluding to, we'll stop kind of tiptoeing around it. Jalen Brunson has been reported by basically any NBA reporter with a pulse to be pointed directly at joining the Knicks at this point. Mark Stein reported it. Tim McMahon reported it. Someone that Knicks fans would be very familiar with, Ian Begley, is very strongly saying that Brunson is most likely going to end up a Knick, and that it's going to happen fairly quickly once free agency opens on Thursday evening. So I guess my first question for you, I'm curious from your perspective, and I know what my stance is, and I'll share it, which probably the people listening to this pod already know what it is, but I'll share it to you right after I ask you this question first, because I want to hear it like untainted by any of my views or whatever. But what do you think led to this? Do you think it's just the obvious nepotism involved with Leon Rose basically being like Jalen's uncle, and
Right.
the fact that the Knicks just hired his dad to be an assistant under Tibbs, which is not a position that he hasn't held before, but it is the first time that he's held it, a month before his son became a free agent. Or like, is there another reason? Like, do you think that there is maybe something to him wanting to sort of forge his own path where, signing a big contract with the Mavs would mean, yes, rejoining a team that just made the Western Conference Finals, but also basically saying I'm okay playing second fiddle for this whole
Right.
next contract. Like that. There's no way that you're going to supplant Luka Doncic. Whereas maybe after the postseason that he had without Doncic,
Mhm.
for the stretches there, maybe he's feeling a little more like he wants to forge his own path. I don't know. What are you thinking as far as the motivations go for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely you have to assume that the family ties play a big role there. And I think it ultimately does come down to, I mean, he had a great relationship with the Mavs organization, with the players, the coaches. He was beloved here, and so you have to assume that it comes down to just wanting more responsibility and wanting a bigger role. And obviously, yeah, the Knicks are going to offer him a life changing contract. But with him getting more of an opportunity and potentially getting a bigger role, maybe he sees that as, hey, that will also potentially lead into my next big contract. And that might give me a better opportunity to have even more life changing money. Whereas if I'm second fiddle to Luka Doncic and he has the usage with him is so high, maybe they just don't see me as valuable, and maybe I'm expendable. Maybe it becomes more difficult to earn maybe a second contract down the line. I kind of think it kind of is those two things, the family ties and the role. But the reason I kept going back to, well, I am not convinced he will leave because of the role, was because I just don't know that he is ever going to be the number one option in New York. That's kind of where I'm at, and I also feel like the Knicks, I mean, it's New York. They're always going to go swinging for the big names. And as much as I love Jalen Brunson, he's not Donovan Mitchell. He's not Bradley Beal. He's definitely not Dame Lillard. So the second something more appealing comes along the way, what does that mean for him? And he's already, in my opinion, not the focal point. Like you got you got RJ and you got IQ. So to me, I just was like, why? If the family ties are that strong, follow the family ties. I get it, but we can give you 5 years, and do you really think you're going to be number one over RJ and whoever else comes down the line? I just don't know. And so for me, I don't know, I guess a little stumped, but I have to hope that it primarily came down to the family ties, because anything else to me would be poor basis for that decision.
Yeah, I do wonder a bit if maybe, I think you bring up a good point, and there's no indication over the last week and change that the Knicks are super into the idea of trading Julius Randle either,
Right.
which I think a lot of Knicks fans would be eager to see what like a Jalen Brunson, Quentin Grimes, or even Evan Fournier, like Brunson, Fournier, RJ, Obi, and Mitchell Robinson lineup could look like, or something like that.
Absolutely.
And that would be more of a shift, and that I think would give Brunson at least an opportunity to be on like equal footing with RJ, you
Yes.
know. But I
Yes.
think that we've seen Julius Randle fancies himself to be more of a Luka Doncic type player,
Right.
whether he is or not, and that's the sort of usage that he wants. So there is definitely a case to be made for like if they keep Randle, unless Randle can get a pretty serious attitude adjustment, like
Mhm.
how different is Brunson's role going to be from what it was in Dallas, except for you could argue that Dallas didn't even have a player like RJ in terms of
Right.
the perceived or the organizational push towards him being a number one option going forward, or something
Mhm.
like a number one option, which
Right.
is what we saw down the stretch of this season. So the fit is really interesting. And I think I'm with you. I do think it comes mostly down to the family ties. I think that also, I mean, it should not be understated that like the Knicks probably jacked up his value by a good amount by having so much interest in him, because
Right.
I actually don't think that the reported contract, and this will be my next question. You like, if you want to
Mhm.
start getting ready for it, but like, I
Mhm.
don't think that the perceived value of the contract, whether it ends up being like 4 for 100, 4 for 110, so somewhere in that like 25 to 27.5 million annually range there, I don't think
Mhm.
that's that bad. That makes him a top 50 paid player in the NBA.
Yeah.
That makes him a top like 15 paid point guard specifically.
Mhm.
I don't think that's that bad. If we're being
Mhm.
honest, like I think that's pretty fair for him. Especially if you're banking on like what he showed in the postseason is a positive trend, and every single year of his career he has gotten better. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that he'll keep getting better, and maybe in like 2 years he'll plateau at a better version of himself and then ride out his prime for a number of years. But that would be a good outcome to me, I think, for that amount of money. So how do you feel, before we start talking about some of the other aspects, how do you feel about the money that is
Mhm.
being thrown around right now? That like 25 to 27 million figure that people are talking about for Brunson, and you know, presumably for like 4 years, if I had to guess. All right, I'll be right back in with Lauren, and we'll be talking more about the fit of Jalen Brunson with the rest of his potential, or maybe at this point, probable new Knicks teammates. But now is the time to seek wellness, joy, and abundance in all areas of your life. It is summer, after all. Starting with what you eat with Sakara, you can get nutrient dense meals, snacks, and supplements that nourish your body without ever sacrificing taste or quality. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you the tools you need to transform your life with their organic, ready to eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. Their nutritionally designed chef crafted breakfast, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful plant rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door, ready to eat. I got to try some Sakara for myself, and let me tell you that the offerings were fantastic, and ready to eat is definitely true. Most things, the most you have to do is maybe throw it in the microwave or throw it in the pan for a minute, but it's all pre-made for you. Some of it just needs to be heated and eaten. A lot of it is just like really tasty salads that you could just eat right out of the package without really needing to do anything to it. So it's a great service for people that don't really like to cook, or just want some option to not have to cook every single day. So right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/locked-on20 or enter code locked-on20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/locked-on20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/locked-on20.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I do think he's earned it. It sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But I mean, he's earned it. He's succeeded in a starting role, and like you said, he's gotten better each year of his career. The thing about Jalen Brunson is that he's a very smart dude on and off the court, and so he knows what his limitations are. He knows he's undersized. He knows the defense, isn't that great. So what does he do? He takes a lot of charges. He maximizes on other teams' errors, and he focuses on improving his shot efficiency, his obviously the accuracy, and also just the overall aggression. And so him potentially taking that next step into being, again, while I don't believe he's going to be the focal point, he is going to be the lead guard. And so him having that, being the one bringing the ball up the floor, if that is the case, which I assume it will be, he will get that opportunity to be more aggressive and really show that, hey, I can take even more of a step up and be even more of a contributor on offense. And so I do think he will show people that he is worth that, especially playing on the stage that comes with being a New York Knick. And so I think it will be fine. It's just, him being a second round pick, playing in Dallas, where a lot of NBA fans just aren't watching the Mavericks. So it sounds a little crazy. But I think for Brunson, it will be good. And I do think he's going to continue to take steps forward. And I'm excited to kind of see him go from, this guy that's only been in the league for 4 years and start transitioning towards becoming more of a vet in the league, and how he continues to just embody the leadership, and how that ultimately, like how far that can take him. Because I mean, you look at some of these undersized guys, and my mind immediately goes to Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, who are offensive oriented, have a good mind for the game, a good read for the game. Both were later draft picks, and just have made a career for themselves. And so I think for Jalen Brunson, I mean, obviously those are really solid players, and that's a lot to also live up to. But I do think he could follow a similar path, especially in New York.
Yeah, the name Fred VanVleet has left my lips a number of times over this past week when we've been talking about Brunson. So
Mhm.
eh, I think it's an easy comp to make, right? Like, I
Yes,
mean,
absolutely.
they're undersized bulldog type guards that maybe profile more as, a combo guard hybrid, despite the diminutive stature, but also can sort of be that lead guard, mostly for their creation potential. The one thing that I think sets them apart, though, is Van Vliet is not fantastic when he gets inside, but is a more prolific 3-point shooter. Brunson, I think, is not quite there as far as being a super prolific, like big volume 3-point shooter yet, which
Right.
maybe that's that next
That
step
could
that he
be.
attempts to take with the Knicks, right?
Yeah.
But on the inside, he's awesome. I mean, he's
Yes.
like 98th percentile in
Hmm.
inside scoring and has been for about 3 straight years now for a
Absolutely.
guard. So how do you feel about that? Like, what do you think about the fit, I guess, with the Knicks?
Hmm.
As far as I've certainly had some worries about, okay, the Mavs played, and Gavin brought this up the other day when we were talking
Hmm.
about him, but the Mavs played more of a, not maybe not necessarily a 5-out system, but at least a system where you could space the paint out a little
Absolutely.
bit. The Knicks might be bringing back Mitchell Robinson, who lives there,
Yep.
Julius Randle, who lives in the mid range a lot of the time when he's at
Hmm.
his best, and honestly, he's at his very best when he's trying to get to the rim. And then
Yep.
RJ Barrett, who does kind of the same thing. He's very comfortable getting inside, getting to the rim. Do
Hmm.
you think that that has potential to maybe stymie that one part of Brunson's game? And if he's then forced to take on more of a load of being a volume 3-point shooter, do you
Hmm.
think he's properly equipped for creating and taking 3-point shots, or do you think that that's going to be something he really has to work on?
I definitely think it's going to. He's equipped to do that. I absolutely think he can do that. Sometimes I think I want to start with this. In this last season, especially when he stepped into that starting role full time, there are times when he would hesitate on threes, and it would just, and you would want to pull your hair out because he is a solid shooter. He's not shooting a ton of them per game, and so when he is again that lead guard in New York, I think the key for him will be, and I mean his dad's going to be on the bench, so I have to imagine he's going to be like, hey, you need to shoot that ball. That's why we're paying you. And so, well, not me, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so I don't think he's going to have a problem shooting, getting the 3-point shots up because it might not be right off the bat, but I do think he will eventually kind of get that going. To me, it all comes back to Julius Randle because if Julius Randle wants the ball in his hands, if he wants to create, Jalen Brunson can be a catch and shoot guy, but I don't know that Julius Randle is passing the ball out of the paint a whole lot, maybe as much as one might like. And so having someone like RJ, who, yeah, very athletic, can slash, can get to the rim, that I think will be good for Brunson because JB knows how to make the right plays. He knows how to get guys in their spots because he has a good basketball mind. So even though RJ and Luka are obviously completely different players, JB will know how to get RJ in his spots. He'll be able to defer to RJ to let him go create and do his thing. So I don't think there will be any problem there. And then Mitchell Robinson, I mean, Dwight Powell is like he cannot stretch the floor. And so that, as far as similarities, he was kind of this role like lob threat for Dallas. That was kind of his whole thing, just because Jalen and Luka they will find you as soon as you hit the right spot and they know that the defense can't get there. Mitchell Robinson is a much better version of what we wanted Dwight Powell to be. So personally, I don't know how much pick and roll they're going to use with Jalen Brunson, but if you have scenarios where maybe RJ is taking a possession off, or they're just going to try and get JB in the paint, or make the defense choose between contesting Jalen on the drive and falling back on Mitchell Robinson. If you have those two going in the paint, I mean, that will work, and Jalen will find him time after time because he has no problem sharing the ball. So I do think, and then you've got the rest of the group. You've got Quentin, you've got Obi, who also can fly through the air. I think it will be just fine. I do think it comes back to Julius Randle, and I don't think it will be a problem because Jalen is a pro of all pros. But I think in the short term, if he's still there this season, there could be times when the possessions might not be efficient or effective if Julius is taking the ball out of, which might sound crazy. I don't want it to be like, oh, he can't take the ball out of Brunson's hands, but I just think it could affect the offense and maybe not the best way.
All right. I'll be right back in to finish up with Lauren Gunn. If you want to take a little joy in the Mavericks suffering in losing Jalen Brunson, we're going to talk some about how the Mavs can potentially recover from all this, how they're going to absorb losing their second best player off their Western Conference Finals team. But I got to let you guys know real quick about betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs. Well, not anymore. And Major League Baseball. Yes, that's still going on. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. And let me tell you, I take a look at the odds to win the 2022 National League all the time, and the Mets currently are sitting at number 2 at a plus 375. I would make that bet because why not? Let's go Mets. Of course, you gotta root for the Mets. Well, unless you root for the Yankees, but they're only plus 210, so you can't make as much money there. So place a bet on the Mets, root for the Mets, pick the right team. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online where the game starts. Yeah, I think he'll be all right too.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately my biggest worry more so than the personnel is kind of
Mhm.
Tibbs at this
Yeah.
point. I wonder how much Tibbs is going to set him up to succeed in
Mhm.
many ways. I think we've seen that he's a little uncreative in how he looks at certain players. That said, I mean, he does absolutely adore guards that can get downhill and get into the paint. That's like literally
Yep.
his number one most liked skill. I think of
Yes.
any skill on any type of player, any position. I think his favorite skill is a guard that can get into the paint, regardless of the outcome. And
Right.
like that's been shown ad nauseum for the Knicks, like with the amount that he had Alfred Payton start, who could get into the paint and then just do nothing with it.
Right.
Or Alec Burks, who was also, not a point guard, but was really good at getting into the paint and then shooting 30% there.
Yep.
Or, sometimes kicking it out to somebody. It just was not pretty. So
Right.
there's a part of me that actually thinks, unlike a guy like Evan Fournier, for example, that the Knicks signed last
Mhm.
year as their big, marquee free agent, depending on how you feel like Kemba was, in
Yeah.
terms of that. But, Evan was their big money man last year. They signed him and then Tibbs essentially tried to turn him into Reggie Bullock, which did not fit his skill set because he could put the ball on the floor a bit. He could be more creative, but Tibbs essentially
Mhm.
just wanted him to stand outside the 3-point line and shoot.
Right.
With Brunson, I think actually he's slotting into a role where it's like, okay, this is like the player that Tibbs has been craving for, and now
Mhm.
he can finally get him.
Right.
So hopefully he looks at Brunson in that way and sets him up with the amount of inside looks that he was giving to say that the like good version of that was like Derrick Rose in
Right. Right.
2021, who was able to convert on some of those looks and also was really great at kicking out to the perimeter, but also was not useless as like a spot up 3-point shooter and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So I'm hoping that that's like the destiny for Brunson going forward. Um, so this is something that well, actually, first off, before we get I am going to get into sign and trades in a second because I
Mhm.
saw you tweeting about them earlier. I think it's an intriguing possibility because the Knicks technically don't have enough room to pull this off yet, though I assume they have
Right.
like 8
8
different
deals.
contingencies lined up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm curious, how much money do you think Brunson made himself this postseason? And also, how confident are you that he is going to become more like the player that we saw in the postseason? Like he averaged, just the quick counting stats averages, 21.5 points, 4.5 boards, almost 4 assists per game, 47, 35, 80 shooting splits. And in that Utah series, I mean, he was, I think, the best player on the floor for a
Mhm.
number of years. I mean, and
Yeah.
I know that you said like, and I agree. I don't think that long term he's going to be like a number one option on a
Mhm.
super great team or anything, but he's definitely shown the ability to carry an offense for stretches at a time when he
Definitely.
really gets cooking. So had those 41 and 31 point games, had another 30-point game later in the playoffs. Like I thought he probably, in my estimation, made himself like $30 million, if not
Yeah.
more. But
Absolutely.
what do you think he managed to do for himself during this postseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think he going into the postseason, I think a lot of people were looking at, especially Mavs people that were really focused on the situation, were kind of looking at between 22 and 25. They were kind of like that's where I think a lot of people were like, all right, we're good with that. We'll just see what happens, and then kind of as playoffs go on, you don't have Luka that first those first 2 games against the Jazz, and you kind of are hitting the panic button. And then all of a sudden, Jalen Brunson just, turns it on and is essentially like carrying us. And then Luka comes back and they close out the series. And then, things keep going. And before they know it, they're in the Western Conference Finals and just knocked out the Suns. So with Jalen Brunson being the number 2 in that entire playoff run, I'm with you. I think he went from low 20s to high 20s. And over the course of 4 years, that'll get you between 20 and $30 million. So I think for him, it was a big. I mean, because you got to go back against the Clippers. He struggled against the Clippers in past years, and so in those postseason series, it was kind of like, we really need Jalen Brunson, and he's not performing very well against this defensive versatility and this size. And so going into the Phoenix series, that was a big question for a lot of Mavs fans. It was a question for me. And then he went in and was very much a part of that series. And, they were able to get it done. But I think for him showing that he can go up, and because Utah, I think a lot of people were kind of like, oh, I don't even know what's going on in Utah. But to see him go up against a prepared, equipped, deep, versatile team in the Phoenix Suns and be a big part of Dallas coming out on top, I think that kind of took away a lot of doubt that might have been cast on him as far as being able to go up against long, versatile defenders. And so, yeah, I definitely think he made some money there.
All right. Well, now we'll get to the fun part, the sign and trade scenarios. So, as I was just mentioning, I have no doubt the Knicks have probably 8 contingency plans lined up that they can't it's not that they can't, they probably just don't want to do them until right before free agency, because they want to leave the door open for the Mavs to say okay to a sign and trade,
Right.
which would probably cost them less to move off of guys and all that stuff. But you can't technically consummate that until after free agency starts, because obviously, tampering, whatever.
Right.
So I'm kind of curious what you think a decent like, what do you think? I'll just ask this. What do you think is the absolute most that could be shaken off of the Knicks tree here in exchange for Jalen Brunson? I saw you tweeted out a pretty interesting trade earlier where
Oh, right.
essentially the Brunson sign and trade would be used as a means to get Brogdon to Dallas. And
Right.
I didn't hate that. Like, so do you
Yeah.
think that that's what Dallas will try to pursue? Or do you think that, do you think maybe there's going to be a little spite between the two franchises because of recent
um,
trades and stuff in recent years? Like, how are you feeling on that front?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think there might be a little spite there, and for the Knicks fans that are laughing, thinking that the Mavs are going to somehow net this disaster of a situation, that I think that the Mavs are going to net Malcolm Brogdon out of this disaster of a situation. It's not necessarily that. Personally, I think between the Mavs and the trade and the Knicks, if a sign and trade takes place, I think the absolute most they can get is Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel. I think that's the absolute most that they can get. I think most likely in the event a sign and trade happens, and I'm not fully convinced that it will, I think it will most likely be one of those two. And so I think there are a lot of teams that could use a guy like Nerlens Noel, and there are a lot of teams that could use a guy like Alec Burks, which is why I'm not convinced that a sign and trade is even a for sure thing. So as far as the Malcolm Brogdon of it all goes, that's really kind of a last ditch effort trying to save face on this, again, horribly fumbled situation by the Dallas front office, because he's a guy that has struggled to stay healthy and is in a bad situation, and everyone knows is available. So for Dallas, if you want to try and fill the Jalen Brunson sized hole that's about to be there, you got to do something. You got to get busy, and you're not getting DeJounte Murray. You're not getting any of these, top tier guards that are out there right now. So Malcolm Brogdon, I think, is kind of the obvious answer, but I think we all know that sometimes the most obvious answers are the ones that never happen.
Yeah, I kind of question, like, even if the Mavs would be willing to go all in on a DeJounte Murray anyway, I kind of question that
Right.
fit with Luka to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Because unlike a Brunson, he doesn't offer that on and off ball versatility that you would need
Right.
next to a
Right.
Luka who's going to have the ball in his hands like 80% of possessions.
Right.
I am kind of curious your thoughts. Like, I figure we could just end on a little on some like Mavs talk. Actually,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious where you think this move leaves them. Let's say that they're not. Let's say they don't end up doing the sign and trade with the Knicks. That Cuban is feeling, or whoever is feeling spiteful Maybe it's
Mhm.
Nico. I don't know why Nico would be mad at the Knicks, but whatever.
Right.
Maybe someone in the organization's feeling spiteful and says, "No, screw you guys. We don't want Alec Burks or Nerlens Noel or both of
Right.
them. Like, you guys can, unload your second round picks or whatever to get rid of them to some other team."
Mhm.
Um, if that comes to pass and the Knicks then just say, "Okay, fine, we'll just sign him," and they do that, and the
Mhm.
Mavs get kind of just left empty handed,
Yep.
what do you think their routes are here? Because from what I understand, they're basically at the tax mark already,
Mhm.
and or above it because Luka's extension is kicking in.
Right.
They're going to have about $6 million to spend, and like that's pretty much it. I mean, where
Yep.
do you think that they go from here if that scenario plays out and a sign and trade gets taken off the table, and so there's no opportunity to like use some of the players from the Knicks to sort of
Right.
revamp the team a little bit, or even create like a three-way deal where they get someone attracted to them in that way.
Right. So I mean, it's a little bleak. I mean, we still have Luca, so obviously Mavs fans are not so like, oh, we're done. But there are some paths. So assuming Brunson is gone, we get nothing in return. Right now, it looks like the starting lineup will be Luca, Tim Hardaway Jr., Reggie Bullock, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Christian Wood. And getting Christian Wood, a 20-point per game scorer, that certainly helps the fact that you've just lost a 20-point per game scorer in Jalen Brunson. And so inserting Tim Hardaway Jr. at that 2 spot instead of Jalen also helps you with the points production that you're losing from Jalen Brunson. But then again, you're less playmaking. You don't necessarily have that secondary ball handler in the starting lineup, which kind of puts them back in a position of where they've been in the past, which then kind of brings you to, okay, where does Spencer Dinwiddie fit into all of it? And personally, I'm cool with Dinwiddie coming off the bench for now because for Tim, his value is 0 right now. And him getting back in that starting lineup, I think for the Mavs to have potential options down the line because his contract is declining, and I think it's team friendly. I think it will be good for Tim to be back in the starting lineup, surrounding Luka with shooters. The defense will be, I mean, Christian Wood over Dwight Powell in the starting lineup is an upgrade. So I think the Mavs will be okay. And it does look like, I don't know if it's not inked yet, so it hasn't happened. But if they do get Goran Dragic, I mean, that's another solid vet playmaker off the bench. I don't know how many games he's going to play. I don't know how many minutes he's going to play. But between having Spencer Dinwiddie, potentially Dragic, you just drafted Jaden Hardy, and then Frank Ntilikina, who again a guy that gives you impactful minutes, and he's going to get more minutes with Jalen Brunson not being there, and with Dragic potentially being, I mean, I hate to say it, but like injured a fair bit, and so or unavailable, I should say unavailable. So I'm excited, I guess, to see Frank and to see Jaden Hardy because I think Hardy's a fun young player that is a scorer. And so when you have young guys that can score, um, there's always room for that on a team. And so for Dallas, I don't know that. I mean, obviously there's a hole in the starting lineup from a playmaking perspective. But as far as points go, I don't know that there's necessarily going to be a huge step back. And so for the Mavs, the biggest struggle right now is, what's the next move as far as additions? Because you are about to have that exact situation plus Jalen Brunson, and you don't have that anymore. So in that regard, it is bleak, but you also have to identify potential moves down the line to try and put all your chips in. And right now, that move is not easily identifiable for them, in my opinion. I'm sure they have situations that they're monitoring, but right now their pick next year goes to the Knicks, and you can't trade 2024 because of the Stepien rule. So you kind of gotta wait right now. You gotta wait for Tim Hardaway Jr.'s value to get back up. You gotta wait for the pick to go to the Knicks, and so you can trade your picks moving forward. And then maybe at that point, something will arise for them to push all their chips in. Maybe Jaden Hardy will show that he's, a young player that's got some upside. And we'll just see what happens. But I still think Dallas has, a solid defensive team. I think they're going to be all right, but it's definitely a big hurdle that they kind of have to overcome moving forward because he was going to be a very high value asset for the Mavs, and now they just don't have it. So it's tough, but I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, you mentioned the needing to be ready to push all the chips in. And it is kind of an intriguing roster to look at in the sense of like, I think that they have a pretty high floor,
Mm-hmm.
but I question how much ammunition they have to get better because,
100%.
I think that there's not like, I think they really are probably hoping that Hardy pops in many
That,
ways,
yeah,
you know.
absolutely. And something else that I forgot to mention is the MLE. So you mentioned they do have
Mhm.
the MLE, and it's only a $6.3 million MLE. So they're going to use it. They have to use it, but I don't know what that looks like. There's obviously been the reported interest with Gary Payton II, but what that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And so I assume they'll use it. I would like to see them add a wing. And I think they're definitely hoping that they've, struck gold with Jaden Hardy. And some people think that they have, as far as it being a value pick, but you just can't bank on that. That's not a strategy. You got to give him opportunity to show what he can do. And fortunately, because I love playing young guys and seeing what they can do. I think it's exciting because you're losing Jalen Brunson. You kind of have to do that for a multitude of reasons. So I am excited for him. But right now, as far as potentially, I'm with you. As far as like a flashy roster, it's not that. It hasn't really been that. So if you're going to try and go push all your chips in, what are you going to offer someone? You know what I mean? You're going to get outbid because you don't have the young flashy player. So they've got a lot of hurdles to overcome. But I think a lot of people right now are counting their blessings that Nico was able to pull off the Christian Wood trade, because if that hadn't gone through and Dallas is sitting here looking at this team without Jalen Brunson, that's a big, big problem. So I also tweeted out earlier today that Nico has done multiple things to prove that he is being aggressive in terms of working towards putting this team in a position to get a title. Moving off Porzingis was a big one. The Christian Wood trade. I think he's going to try and be aggressive to correct this as much as he can. Sometimes you can't just will things to happen, but I can't imagine Dallas is over there sitting on their hands.
Yeah, and there's certainly reports that the Knicks are not going to be sitting on their hands either, even
Right.
after getting Jalen Brunson. So there might be a lot of movement going on for both these teams. Certainly, the one player, though, is presenting quite the crossroads for both teams. I'm sure there's going to be lots more to talk about after free agency dust settles and everything else. But, Lauren, I think this is a good point to wrap up on for now. Do you want to remind everybody where to find you on Twitter, where to find your work, and all that good stuff before we get going?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the Lauren Gunn with 2 N's. I co-host the Gunshot podcast with my brother Grant Gunn. We try to do our best to talk about every NBA team, every major storyline, and even cover the teams that don't get a whole lot of NBA coverage. So yeah, come check us out there. We're always looking to connect with fans from other teams.
All right. Well, that has been it for this episode of Locked On Knicks. Sounds like we're going to have a busy couple days ahead of us for the Knicks and the Mavs. So buckle up, everybody. But for now, thank you all for listening. We will be back with more great episodes this week. We have at least 2 more that I know of, and we're going to have a free agency reaction and all kinds of good stuff. So keep your ears peeled, your eyes peeled if you're checking us out on YouTube. Leave us some good reviews, leave us some thumbs up, comment on our YouTube videos. It's certainly a place to be there. Lots of discussions happening. So lots of great stuff. But until next time, thank you all for listening. Talk to you all soon. Peace out.